Good morning, everyone, and welcome to BMPA's webinar on fiscal preparedness for a Black Swan event. Ever since this COVID has hit us, we have, as individuals, we've been trying to strengthen our immune system, not just for us, but for our loved ones. The only reason for doing that is we want to protect ourselves from the virus. And that's why we've been trying to ensure that we take vitamin C, etc., to ensure that our immune system is strong enough to reject the virus. This applies to our business also. Our business also needs to be prepared for such events. And this has been a huge learning. Our today's talk is about exactly this. Our speaker for the day is Mr. C.G. Ramakrishnan, popularly known as RK, Executive Director and Chief Executive Officer of Technova. RK is very passionate about finance, about economy, particularly the Indian economy. You can always engage him in a debate about the Indian economy and where it is headed. RK's passion comes through when he's talking about the Indian economy. He's a management graduate from the NMIMS, and he is today going to take us through a presentation which will be about 40 minutes, in which he will talk about how we can get our companies ready to face Black Swan events like the one which we are facing just now. RK will be talking for about 40 minutes, after which we will handle the Q&A. You will see on this Zoom webinar a Q&A box. You can post your questions there. I am Mehul Desai, your host and moderator for today. I will be addressing the questions to RK, and he will answer them at the end of the presentation. So without taking further time, I now welcome RK. RK, please take over, all yours.
Good morning to everybody. Thank you, Mehul Bhai. Thank you, Fahim Bhai and BMPA for giving me this opportunity to share my thoughts and speak a few concepts on this issue of fiscal preparedness for a Black Swan event. I'm delighted to be part of this seminar, webinar. And at the end of the, as Mehul Bhai, as you mentioned, at the end of the presentation, I would be glad to take any questions that are there. But let me also say that I think what I've just covered here is not rocket science. I've just covered some of the basic concepts of finance, which are very relevant in peacetime, relevant during wartime, relevant during non-crisis periods and crisis periods. And perhaps some of those concepts, if we go through it during peacetime and during non-crisis periods, I think it helps us to stay much better, fitter when the crisis hits us. So I'm going to talk about only concepts of finance, obviously, and I think it's very, very relevant to say that at an overall organization level, if we have to be fully fit, I think there are other areas related to the marketing and the sales, the areas related to overall general strategy, the areas related to operations and technology, and related to human relations, and the whole aspect that needs to be covered to ensure that you are fully fit. What I'm trying to do is to only cover the aspects of the fiscal and the financial things. So with those things, I just want to start that. I will start a presentation in a, I will share my screen in terms of what I would like to share. And if there are anything, please, in case there are things that you find that are slightly difficult or so, please stop me. And in fact, I will try my best to see as lucid and simple. I will try to keep it as simple as possible. The basic thing I just want to say is that, you know, if people look at finance as a very, very, maybe a complex topic or so, I would just want to demystify it, de-jargonize it, and just try to say that all of us, whether we are in marketing, sales, operations, top management, middle management, HR, I think what we try to do is that just understand the elements of finance of the business. And what I'm going to talk of finance of the business. I'm not going to talk of business of finance. I'm not going to talk of, you know, the exotic things like foreign exchange. I'm not talking of too many things which are more from a point of view of treasury management or things which are the prerogative of the finance team. I'm going to talk of the business. I'm going to talk of the finance of business, not the business of finance. So maybe in the next 20-30 minutes, I will just share the slides. Just a minute. Am I audible enough to all of you? Mehul bhai, fine bhai, am I audible enough?
All good.
Yes, you are.
Please
You
go
are.
ahead.
You are.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, so let me just run through you the presentation that I have put it here together. Once again, I think I'm thankful to the BMPA for this webinar. What is a Black Swan event? I think in the BMPA, in their note is already explained what is a Black Swan event. I just want to highlight a couple of points to it. One of the point that it is extremely rare. It doesn't occur every day. It doesn't occur every year, or maybe it doesn't occur even in a decade. The impact of it is quite high, and it has potentially and actually very severe consequences in terms of fiscal, in terms of many other things. However, the event looks predictable after the event is over that this could have had happened and we could have been far more better prepared for that event. So these are some of the characteristics of a Black Swan event. And as I go along, I will also talk partly in Hindi so that it becomes a little more I can connect with the team. But pardon me, my Hindi is not as good. So, but I will try to do in Mumbai Hindi. So this is what we call as a Black Swan event. And what are some of the examples that we have seen of the Black Swan event in the last 30, 40 years? I think most of us have been living for the last, say, 40, 50, 60 years. I think the things that come to our mind, some of the things that come to my mind is the Asian crisis of 97, the dot-com bust of 2000, the 9/11 crisis post the 9/11 event in US in 2001, the financial crisis post the Lehman bust in 2008, and the Brexit in 2016. These are some of the events. I think if you go a little much more longer, obviously another Black Swan events was the Great Depression in 1929 to 32. And of course the World War and the impact of the World War II. And of course, one more other thing that comes to my mind in the 70s was the aspect of the oil crisis and the OPEC related crisis in 70s. But what now is, according to me, which is the latest one and the biggest one in terms of a Black Swan event is the COVID 2020. Why do I call this as the biggest? Because the impact of this COVID is in three ways. I would just generalize it in three ways, many ways, but I could capture it. One, I think is very clearly on the health front and the medical front. It has hit all of us. And I think the numbers are counting every day. So the impact of this in many other crises was not in health and medical, but this crisis is induced and led by a medical and a health crisis. Of course, it leads from those crises based on the lockdowns and based on the impact of the COVIDs to an impact on the income and the jobs and the revenue and the livelihood. So that is a very big impact. Earlier, the question was whether it's a question of life or livelihood. I don't think it's a question of either or. It's a question of lives and livelihood. So it's not a question of Jan or Jahan. Dono ka issue hai. So it's a question of incomes and jobs. And I think the third dimension of this whole impact is in the form of real wealth erosion, asset prices coming down, and generally one feels low because the wealth erosion effect actually impacts our effects in terms of our spending and consumption habits. And today is based on this effect of the last 4 months. I think the values of the assets have all come down significantly. Therefore, one is not in a mood to actually spend or invest. So I think this is the three-dimensional impact of this COVID: the health, the jobs, and the wealth effect. So how does one approach, what are these issues therefore in a crisis? What are the key financial issues? Again, no rocket science. I think it impacts everybody at an organizational level or at an individual level in these three ways. What are those three ways? I think what one feels, what one sees immediately is that there's an impact on the profit and loss of an organization, of a company, or even of an individual. I think the earnings impact, the earnings that comes, the hit on the earnings, the hit on the final net income, I think is something that one is seeing in all of us, whether it's organizations or individuals. So one of the first thing that we would like to focus on is that in such a crisis, how do you restore your P&L as quickly as possible? So that's point one. Point two, and I believe this is in fact in such crises is more important to actually look at it in an immediate basis, is that your balance sheet in such a crisis gets hit most. What I mean by protection of the balance sheet is that the P&L is hit, but the balance sheet is hit much more, because your asset values that you have in terms of debtors, in terms of any other assets that you have, even if you're holding some mutual funds in your reserves and as an asset, those asset values come down. In some cases, it's come down very drastically. So I think the protection of the balance sheet in terms of asset is very important, whereas your liabilities remain the same. What you owe remain the same, and what you own in terms of आपका जो है उसका asset value जो है घट जाता है, और आपको जो देना है liabilities जो है, whether it's to the bank, whether it is to the creditors, उसका value वही का वही होता है. So therefore इससे asset liability का mismatch हो जाता है. So balance sheet protection I think is very, very important in such a crisis. And I think the third, which is again even more important in such a thing, is your cash flow. Because cash flow is real. Profit and loss is I would say it's a good this thing that you made profit, so you made loss. Whereas your cash flow is real. Your cash balances as of today morning, or of yesterday, or as of next month is as real as it can be. And therefore, the cash flow is something that you need to align and balance it during this crisis. Why do I say so? Because I think this crisis brings about an issue of liquidity challenge, liquidity crisis to every company. I'm sure it affects every company's individuals in different ways. But how you manage the short-term liquidity, I think really determines whether you remain solvent or you go down under. I think the most important thing that I would like to say in a short term is to ensure that your short-term liquidity crisis does not get converted into a long-term solvency problem. So I think that's what I would say are the three important issues in a crisis. And this is nothing else but we call in our financial language as the trinity of the financial statements. So P&L, balance sheet, and cash flow. So again, to just summarize what I said, I think hamare isme, as I said, there will be a lot of noise. There are a lot of people who would say, you do this, you do that. There are people who will go advise. You would see something that's happening from other companies, and you do not know what to do. So I think you know a lot of things to be done. But the most important thing in such an hit is how do you actually prioritize and really sequence what you need to do. So therefore, I believe that in this prioritizing and sequencing is something we put down in three buckets. Three buckets in terms of short term, we survive. I think every plan that has to be in the short term. What's the short term here? Could be 90 days, could be 180 days, because the crisis is still very much within. We have not found a medical and a health solution to it. There's no vaccine yet in the nearby. So therefore, the impact of this, the short term could drag on. I thought initially the short term could be 90, 120 days. Now the short term could be 180 days. So we bucket it in terms of short term survival, a mid-term beyond the 6 months in terms of trying to repair and actually get back to some amount of normalcy, which is called as revival. And in the long term, I think we have a plan to say what changes in the business model we need to do of our business, because there are going to be some permanent damages. The question is how much and what is a permanent damage in terms of revenue. So therefore, from a longer term point of view, to assess what is the damage into the model and how we change the business model in terms of the revenue model, in terms of the cost model, in terms of the cash flow model, what do we do in the mid and the long term to actually, and then go on to obviously, it is not just about risks and threats alone, it is also about a great amount of opportunities. And I know some of the printers, and I know in this case, quite a lot of you are optimistic to say that this crisis brings about also an opportunity of bringing in new products. So I think from a longer term point of view, to de-risk the current and de-risk the core, and then obviously go for new in terms of what's the opportunities. So survive, revive, and thrive. So if I have to now step back and just say, in each of the thing, in the profit and loss, what do we do? So if you look at in terms of what we look in the demand, what's the current demand that for many companies are? I think everybody is struggling to say at what level of the revenue that we are in today. I believe there are companies specifically in the print sector, in the packaging, who are doing now at maybe 80-90% of the pre-COVID levels. There are many in the general commercial printing segments who are struggling between 25 to 35 to 40 levels. There are certain segments in the industry sectors like pharma, like FMCG, like perhaps other goods which are linked to that. The healthcare, the hygiene related industries are much up and running. Industries which have to do obviously with the commercial printing, general printing, of course many other entertainment sectors, sectors which are linked to that. I think they're all industrial products. Industrial products may be somewhere in between. Maybe those industrial products are producing goods for the essential categories. Now I know in our industries also newspapers are still somewhere between 55 to 60% of the levels. Advertising revenues have collapsed. Maybe hopefully it should revive in Q2 to some extent with the festive season happening. So I think the whole issue of demand and revenue is something that is a very important thing that is at top of the mind of most of us, most of the print owners. And I would say, while it would be anywhere depending upon individual companies, but I think if we get a 55 to 60% at the full year level of 2021 of what you did in 1920, I think would be considered to be quite very good considering the situation. Because I'm saying the first quarter is a real washout, the second quarter may be ramping up, third quarter may be ramping up. So I would put something like a 15% level in Q1, 50% in Q2, 75% in Q3, and maybe 85% in Q4. So if you add up all of this, I think we might be somewhere between 55 to 58 to 60%. And if we do that, I think we would have done a great favor to the organization, because I think this is a year where we are not talking of growth. I think if you are able to handle the degrowth of whatever levels, 30, 40%, 25% degrowth as compared to previous year, and I think if we keep our cash flows and if we keep our head above water, I think we have done a great thing. So I don't think we should worry that we have revenues are lesser by 30, 25%, because it's just a fact that the first quarter has actually been an entire 90 days of first quarter. I don't think more than 10, 15, 20% would have in the demand anyway. So survive in the short term to get this back and the revenue back to levels of maybe if we get 75, 80% by Q4, I think it would be a great thing. So what we need to do perhaps is to keep a very, very week by week, month by month, quarter by quarter plan in terms of how the demand and the revenue revival happens. The second one is obviously calibrating the cost. I think in these times, obviously, what will be the topmost of the mind is how do you do a cost, not reduction. I think cost transformation. I think here the question is most important to know is you should know the cost, what is variable and what is fixed, and how we can calibrate the cost, bring down fixed costs based on a zero base restructuring, variable cost, some of the fixed costs can be converted into variable. So we variabilize the cost, and some of the variable cost itself we renegotiate. So calibration of costs is a very, very important aspect in the P&L. And I think it leads finally, because one of the important elements of the cost is actually the structure and the organization structure and the people. So I think this is a time where I think we have to relook at the fact as to what is the right size of the organization. We had built the organization for a certain amount of revenue model, for a certain amount of businesses, and certain amount of operating model. I think this COVID, in a sense, brings us and gives us an opportunity to relook as to what is the size of the organization. We actually have to right size it to go for the new normal. And the new normal could be that the current businesses could perhaps have a shrink of 20%, 15%, whatever that is. And then you could perhaps also have a creation of some new businesses which may require a different set of people. So the right sizing the organization is a very key thing that we do in the P&L. And obviously, what do we do? I think the endeavor is to stop the bleeding and achieve the break-even as early as possible. ये तो सबका ये है कि in Q1, every company, I think 99% of the companies I would think would have a loss situation in Q1. It is but normal because you've seen a collapse of revenue. So while you're doing the calibration of cost and you're right sizing it, you will find that your Q1 may be in loss. I think what therefore we need to do is, what is the level in which I will touch in the break even when I come a few slides later, as to what are the concepts in break even that we need to look at. So therefore we can achieve the break even as early as possible. And now go on to the second part, which is what I mentioned about the balance sheet. And I think, as I said, that the balance sheet is a very important element that we need to look at. And आपके सबके balance sheet में जो liabilities होंगे, longer term liability होंगे, longer term loans होंगे, या जो भी कुछ structure होंगे, उसको restructure करना. उसको अगर long term liabilities का loan अगर 3 साल, 4 साल, 2 साल जो भी होगा, जिसके किसके balance sheet में होगा, उसको restructure करना. तो ये जो immediate thing, one, not just the moratorium that the banks have given for 3 months or 6 months. I think one of the other things that we need to do is to look at the overall long-term liability and ensure that it doesn't come in as a repayment in this 2021, or maybe as you might want to actually structure it in such a way that you take an 18-month moratorium, not a 3 or 6 months, because you can go and convince the bankers to say that your business model is still very sound. You are taking the following steps to restructure the model and get back to profitability very quickly. But इसके लिए आपको मुझे आपका सपोर्ट 12 महीने का या 18 महीने का जरूरत पड़ेगा. तो restructuring the long term liability. The other element of the balance sheet, I think, is your fixed assets. आपका भी अगर asset होगा, your printing machine, your pre-press areas, your post-press areas, your land, your factories which are perhaps not fully used. And इसमें आपको ये क्या देखना पड़ेगा कि fixed assets में कौन सा फिक्स एसेट फुल्ली वर्क हो सकता है, कौन सा पार्शियली वर्किंग हो रहा है, एंड कौन सा फिक्स्ड एसेट्स आप शायद यूज ही नहीं कर रहे हो. सो ये कोविड सिचुएशन में आपको ये मौका है कि आपको ये पूरे फिक्स्ड एसेट्स को भी देखने कि कौन से फिक्स्ड एसेट्स को आप पूरे स्वेट कर सकते हो और किसको स्वेट नहीं कर सकते. सो some of these things which fixed assets, if you are not able to utilize it in the near foreseeable future, I think it is better that it is put to sale. And therefore, at least that can get converted from assets to cash. And that cash you may require to perhaps fund the working capital of your business. So that's something that you want to have to take a look at. And I think very important, which is one of my favorite topics, is the working capital. I think fixed capital or assets की बात की, लेकिन working capital जो है, which is predominant in, I think, in all our businesses. Fixed investment is done and done with. But I think the day-to-day aspect of your raw materials, finished goods, account receivable and cash and account payable, इस cycle को मैं अगले slides में बताऊंगा कि ये cycle को कैसे देखा जाता है और उसमें से कैसे हम उसको work किया जाए. So working capital is an important one. I will cover it in a later lines. I think along with the restructuring of long-term liabilities, short-term working capital credit line, and I think the MSME announcement which was made, I know it has not yet got off the ground fully, but I believe the government is sincere about it. And I'm sure over the next few months, the MSME collateral-free loan and credit guarantees that has been announced of the 3 lakh crore is a very, very important instrument for the government to get the economy back. And I think there are a lot of announcements which will be made and which will come to ensure that you get a lot of people covered under the MSME loans. Ramu had sent me a note saying that a lot of people are still not able to get it, but I think there are current articles in the newspapers, and very soon we may get an announcement that the MSME eligibility will be, that bracket will get further widened to ensure that you have individual entrepreneurs, individual people also who are in business to be eligible for those loans. So short-term working capital credit lines अगर आपने अभी तक नहीं किए तो आज ही के दिन में आप extra working capital lines line up कीजिए. So that's the aspect of that. And one of the most important in this balance sheet where the asset can deteriorate is the whole issue of your account receivable. And that's where the concept of credit evaluation and credit risk insurance. आपको शायद पता होगा कि risk insurance होता है assets के लिए, fixed assets के लिए, वो तो शायद आप करते भी होंगे. But I would strongly recommend that one of the things that we need to be prepared for such events is, I think it is important aspect now of our business life that we will need to have some sort of protection for the credit risk that we give. We do our thing in terms of evaluation and then obviously carefully calibrate what credit or not credit to give, but we support and supplement that with a credit risk insurance cover. So coming back to the third element, I think finally it all translates to, as I mentioned to you, the here and now is a cash flow. And I think a lot of people have said cash is king. I said cash is not king. It is the emperor today. And I think it supersedes every other thing, because if you don't have a cash flow management, then I think, as I said, the liquidity crisis can soon convert into a solvency issue. And I believe that these are times where a lot of companies will have the liquidity problem, and if not managed well, it will result into insolvency. And I hope and pray that none of all the printers out here never have a insolvency issue. So I think we need to ensure that the cash flow is very much focused upon and align all activities to the revenue. Whatever the very important aspect of this is that we have to align all the aspects of the organization to the revenue. If the production and the purchase and other expenses, if they are not aligned to the revenue, then obviously you're going to have a tremendous amount of asset liability mismatch and imbalance in your inflows and outflows. So I think this is an important thing. And we finally therefore say in cash flow, we monitor and maintain what are the short-term debt levels. There may be a time where your current short-term debt levels may increase because you will have to manage the cash flow. But I think we have a planned way. And you look at the working capital and bring it back under control, and thereby the short-term debt levels बाद में शायद दोबारा normalcy में आए. But in the short term, your short-term debt levels may go up. So here I now come to a concept here called the break-even. I think ये तो सभी जानते हैं कि break even क्या होता है, लेकिन ये crisis में all the more important हो जाता है कि आपको पता हो जाए कि आपकी कंपनी की जो बिजनेस की ब्रेक इवन क्या होती है. सो ये ब्रेक इवन जो है फंडामेंटल है कॉन्सेप्ट विच इज बीन देयर फॉर एंड बट ओवर अ पीरियड ऑफ टाइम व्हाट हैपेंस इज हम लोग बिजनेस के जो डे टू डे ऑपरेशंस में लग जाते हैं उसमें हम लोग शायद ये भूल जाते हैं कि हमारे ब्रेक इवन क्या होता है. So to know that, I think what you need to know is your variable and fixed cost, your unit contribution, whatever is your selling price. And I know selling price is a topic you would say it is all governed by competition. It is not governed by you. But I'm sure that each one of you in your own way are contributing to some value addition to your customers. And therefore you have a say in being able to be not just going by what the competition is pricing it, also based on whatever value addition that you can do. So I think the gross contribution is nothing else but selling price minus all your variable cost. And if you have a fixed cost in absolute amounts and you divide it by the unit contribution, you get to the break-even point in units. And I believe in this crisis, all the more so that if you know where are you in terms of your break-even, then you have a roadmap. Then you say that I will reach break-even by August or by September or maybe by October, or I could prepone that break-even. How could you prepone the break-even? If you are able to reduce the fixed cost, if you are able to reduce your variable cost, if you are going to retain your pricing. So I think a combination of pricing, unit variable cost, and fixed cost, I think you can play it around to say that you can achieve your break-even. And I'm sure every businessman's objective in the short-term survival is, besides the cash flow balancing, is your ability to hit your break-even as soon as possible. So this is something on break-even. I think we should know, I don't want to go into too much of operating leverage and all, but I think a simple thing of your variable cost, fixed cost, and unit contribution, if you know, then you would know your break-even. I'm sure you would have done this, but it is perhaps once again better to actually look at it, all of it together again and see where are you. And lower the variable cost and fixed cost, I think lower is your break-even and higher is your margin of safety. I think that's, and the key link here, what I would like to say You have a market size and a market share. That's one part of the market area. Then you have your plant actual capacities and capacity utilization. And then the concept of break even. So I would like you perhaps to, as a take home, is rework to say what is your market share, what is your capacity utilization, and at what level of market share and what level of capacity utilization are you breaking even. Obviously, a lower percentage of market share and lower capacity utilization, if you break even, then you have a higher area of margin of safety. So I think this is something that I would like to, perhaps you know it better, you are businessmen, but I think this is something from a concept of fiscal preparedness for any such event, that if you know what the break even is, you will know and what are the levers to reach the break even, which I will cover in a future slide. So now comes to one of the favorite topics that I talk of usually, is the whole thing of working capital. And here I don't want to use any finance jargon of current assets hai, kya hai, quick ratio kya hai, current ratio kya hai, ye to theek hai. लेकिन I would like to explain ये जो आपके जो रोजमर्रे की जो ऑपरेशन प्रोसेस है, आप अगर ये 4 सेट ऑफ प्रोसेसेस को आप कंट्रोल करते हो और आप मैनेज करते हो, तो आपके वर्किंग कैपिटल बिल्कुल ठीक होगा. What are the set of 4 processes? I would like to share it in terms of business understanding. Number 1 process I see is a process of your sales and production. And this process is inherent for everybody. Everybody has a production process, everybody has a sales process. And the balancing and alignment of this is what creates an imbalance or a balance in what is outcome called the finished goods. So the set of first process is sales and production creates an outcome called finished goods. If sales is more than production, your finished goods is lesser. And if production is more than sales, your finished goods goes up. So I think set of process 1 is process and outcome. The second one, again, which is very important in today's life, is sales and collections. And iska jo, what is the outcome of it? Isse kya nikalta hai? Account receivable. And I am sure everybody is today engaging with the account receivable as one of the issues in terms of how you can keep the AR under control. The third is your actual material consumption and material purchase. ये शायद हम सेल्स और कलेक्शन की देखते हो, लेकिन कंजम्पशन और परचेस इक्वली इंपॉर्टेंट है कि हम क्या कंज्यूम करते हैं और हम क्या परचेस करते हैं. इसका जो नतीजा निकलता है रॉ मटेरियल का बैलेंस या इम्बैलेंस के ऊपर. एंड द फोर्थ वन, okay, all these 3 ones, if you take in terms of the language of, is called as a gross working capital, GWC जो मैं बोल रहा हूँ. ये 3, finished goods, account receivable and raw material and work in progress, and maybe some other current assets, but all these 3 I think creates what we call as a gross working capital. And the fourth set of processes is your purchases and payment, which creates, again, if it is in sync, then your account payable is in sync. It doesn't go into overdue position, it doesn't go into underdue position. So if the message that I'm going to say is one of the key things that all of us, I think the senior management and everybody in the process, is focus on balancing this set of 4 processes. If you do that, then I think I would say your outcome, which is in terms of the finished goods or receivables or materials or payables, will be in balance. And I think that's what is there. And if you reduce the gross working capital from the accounts payable, you get the net working capital. So this is what I would like to say without going to current assets and current liabilities and quick ratio and all. ये अगर 4 प्रोसेस को आप डे टू डे मॉनिटर करें, वीक टू वीक मॉनिटर करें, एंड इसके अंदर मैं क्या मॉनिटर करें वो भी मैं बताता हूं अगले स्लाइड में. ये जो स्लाइड में मैं वर्किंग कैपिटल को अगेन फ्रॉम अ ट्राइपॉड वे, इफ आई हैव टू लुक एट इट, आई थिंक नंबर 1 आई थिंक इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ व्हाट वी कॉल इन द इंग्लिश लैंग्वेज कॉल्ड वेलोसिटी. ये क्या होती है? वेलोसिटी क्या होती है कि आप वर्किंग कैपिटल को कितने बार आप टर्नओवर के ऊपर घुमाते हो. सो मैं सिंपल बताता हूं कि आपके अगर टोटल वर्किंग कैपिटल 90 डेज का हो, टोटल अकाउंट रिसीवेबल हो, रॉ मटेरियल हो, एफजीओ सब मिला के 90 डेज का इक्विवेलेंट हो, तो आपको साल में खाली 4 बार वर्किंग कैपिटल घूमता है. 90 डेज इज इक्वल टू 4 टाइम्स. 73 डेज आपको अगर रखना है, आई वुड से वन ऑफ द की goals that perhaps you can set as a take home from this is, if you are at 4 times turnover, can you set it to 5 times turnover? 90 डेज को आप 73 डेज करते हो तो आप 5 बार घुमा सकते हो working capital को. Again, I don't, because you are all masters of your business, you know your businesses, but I just want to align all the aspect of your business to say, can you do everything that can take the turnover from 4 times to 5 times? If you are at 5 times to 6 times, यानी कि आप 60 दिन में आप घुमाते हो 6 बार, इसका मतलब कि 60 दिन का working capital होता है. So velocity times turnover, I think is very, very important element of working capital, which I would say overemphasize to say during these times, we have to see how can you improve the times turnover. दूसरा, velocity के साथ साथ दूसरा जो T है, quality. आपके working capital की quality क्या होती है? इसका मतलब यह है कि आपके receivables का aging क्या होता है, आपका stocks का aging क्या होता है, because घुमाने के साथ ही साथ आपको ये भी देखना पड़ेगा कि आप जो घुमा रहे हैं वो रीसेंट है कि नहीं, आपके रिसीवेबल्स रीसेंट है, आपके स्टॉक्स रीसेंट है, क्योंकि इसके अंदर अगर रीसेंट नहीं होगा देन आपको एक रिस्क होगा कि ये बैड डेट हो सकता है, या स्टॉक राइट ऑफ हो सकता है, या स्टॉक का वैल्यू कम हो सकता है, या AR का वैल्यू. सो एजिंग यानी कि क्वालिटी को भी देखना बहुत ही जरूरी है. तो वेलोसिटी के साथ क्वालिटी. तीसरा, सिक्योरिटी. सो वेलोसिटी, क्वालिटी और सिक्योरिटी. आपकी वर्किंग कैपिटल सिक्योरिटी, फिजिकल एसेट्स जो फिनिश गुड्स है, रॉ मटेरियल है, ये सब जो है इसकी जो फिजिकल सिक्योरिटी जो है आपकी कहाँ पे एक्टिव होती है, आपकी इंश्योरेंस बराबर है कि नहीं, ये सब फिजिकल सिक्योरिटी में. और फाइनेंशियल सिक्योरिटी होती है जो फाइनेंशियल एसेट्स लाइक रिसीवेबल्स. सो जैसे मैंने बताया, आपके रिसीवेबल्स को क्रेडिट रिस्क इंश्योरेंस अगर किया जाता है तो, या LC में अगर किसी का रिसीवेबल्स होता है तो आपकी जो वर्किंग कैपिटल की सिक्योरिटी जो है हायर लेवल हो जाती है. सो आपको क्या देखना है, वर्किंग कैपिटल वेलोसिटी, टर्नओवर, क्वालिटी ऑफ वर्किंग कैपिटल एंड सिक्योरिटी ऑफ वर्किंग कैपिटल. अगर इसके ऊपर आपने जो भी बिजनेस हो, आपके बिजनेस 30% लेवल हो या 70% लेवल हो या 100% लेवल हो, आप अगर वर्किंग कैपिटल को 4 प्रोसेसेस को कंट्रोल रखते हैं और ये 3 वेलोसिटी, क्वालिटी और सिक्योरिटी को अगर मद्देनजर रखते हैं, इसकी I think I can assure you that your working capital you're doing excellent. I come now to the another aspect of what I call a very, very important aspect today is risk management. मैंने ब्रेक इवन की बात किया, मैंने वर्किंग कैपिटल की बात किया, एक तीसरा एस्पेक्ट है मैं जो कवर करना चाहता हूँ, रिस्क. एंड आई थिंक इट इज इन टुडेज टाइम्स, इन टुडेज सच मेजर, that risk management becomes again very, very critical. So de-risking your company, and I think what are the risks? Again, I think again you know it. I don't need to mention it. Just for this thing I'm listing it. There are risks on your asset. There is risk on credit risk that comes in. There's a currency, commodity, and interest rate risk. And then of course there's a whole lot of business and economic risk. And what does the business and economic risk pertain to? I think it can pertain to a concentration of your customers. If your 80%, 90% of your revenue comes from 2-3 customers, then you are vulnerable to that. In case something happens to those customers, your revenue goes for a hit. So if it's a customer concentration, if it is a geographic concentration of your customers, or if it's even dependence on one plant of your overall thing, I think that is a risk that you will have to look at as to how to mitigate. Another risk is obviously typical any damage that can cost your asset, either due to all other physical risk of earthquake, fire, flood, allied perils, and all such things. I think anything related to an asset related, I think there becomes a loss of profit. There's another thing that can hit your P&L is if there's a customer going insolvent or if your vendor is going insolvent. Both sides. If your customer goes insolvent with your receivables, and if your vendor goes with your either your advance, or if you're not able to then have a continuity of supplies coming in, your P&L gets affected. Your cash flow can get affected if, as I had mentioned, asset liability mismatch hota. And finally, as I said, the commodity, currency, interest rate fluctuation. So today in the world is not easy. I think navigating business in today with risk is not easy. I think one of the first important thing that we need to do is to be aware of our risks. Agar koi risk bina aware ho or suddenly it hits you, then obviously we are taken for a big shock. So I think what one needs to is to go back and say, what sort of risks are there in my business? My business is 10 crore per annum. I want to increase it to 25 crore. I have a business of 50 crores. I want to take it with a bigger investment of 100 crores to go to 100 crore revenue or more. I think an assessment of the business plan should be what is the risk that they are. And if you can mitigate some of the risks, if not all, I think that's something that is a very important requirement in peacetime, so that during wartime you feel that you don't have so many risks hitting you. So what are the risk mitigation that you can do? I think I just maybe walk through this quite faster. I think a whole lot of products that are available, whole lot of insurance products that are available, whole lot of things that you can do. I think what can we do in the business is the business and operations from a geographic, अगर कोई एक टेरिटरी का हो या कस्टमर का हो या सेगमेंट का हो, एक concentration के बजाय diversification. So I think if we can diversify the customer base, the segment base, the geography base, I think that would be a great hedge against such a risk. Second is, I think assets के लिए बहुत सारा industrial all risk cover is there, machinery breakdown is there, marine transit is there. There's a whole lot of insurance that you can do for your fixed assets. For a loss of profits, again, today the pandemic has hit us and we have been able to not get the demand and we have not been able to get. So are there risks which are covered? Can be loss of profits even for 6? Yes, there are such covers which have come into the market now. We can perhaps take a look at it, whether it is advisable for us to cover at least part of it for future such risks that may happen. Another risk on loss of profit is supplier dependency. In this COVID crisis, not only is your customer can go insolvent, your supplier can go insolvent. And therefore your dependency, if you have a dependency on few suppliers, that can also be covered in a loss of profit policy. And as far as currency and commodity is concerned, you can do currency hedgings. I think I can talk on that little more in details later. You can do commodity hedging, whether in the markets or you can do with the vendors, and a whole lot of products. I think the point that I would like to emphasize again and again is the business has risks. I think it's much better to look at the risk and then be aware of the risk and have a risk mitigation plan for each one. So with this, I think you are much better bulletproofed against a future crisis that may happen. So if I would come to from the risk aspect is to say, आप capital जो लगाते हो business में, what is more important right now? And I think earnings are important, margin is important. But I think right now, what is, and even in fact, you say return on capital is important. But I think some of the things, so in capital efficiency, where do you deploy आपके जो capital पूंजी लगाते हो, printing business में लगाते हो, दूसरे किस में लगाते हो, आपके personal finance में, wealth में लगाते हो, आप किस में लगाते हो? Depends upon what the return you get. But I think more important or equally important in such case is what I think I would come to the second one, which is allocation, but third one, which is basically risk and protection. So आपके जो return जो मिलती है उसके साथ जो risk और protection जो है, that determines where you actually will put capital. आपके current capital जो है उसको protect करना आज के तारीख में सबसे बड़ा objective है. More than return on capital, I think return of capital is more important today. So it's not just a return, it's a protection. Therefore, I'm saying return of capital. If you end up this year by protecting your March 20 reserves, I think that itself will be a great thing. It is okay if you don't anything in 2021, but it's very much required that you protect your capital so far that you have generated based on the businesses till March 20. So I think the protection of capital, and therefore that determines where you actually allocate fresh capital. कौन से business में आप capital ज़्यादा लगाओगे या capital निकालोगे? It's not just to allocate, but it's also to withdraw. So I think that is very, very important aspect of today. And I think that is something that you should think on a weekend. It may not be perhaps looking at when you are actually on a day-to-day in the shop floor, you may not be able to think about it. I think something when you reflect and sit back as to what is the business doing, where is the capital going, fixed में हो या working capital में, उसकी रिटर्न क्या है, उसकी रिस्क क्या है, उसकी प्रोटेक्शन क्या है, और हम उससे बेहतर और किसी करने से एलोकेट करने से होगा कि नहीं. So I think allocation criteria. So here I come to one aspect which is not related to the, I think is very, very related. Everybody is today in a gloomy thing. Is why are we, the economy is down. Yes, what are the key engines of the economy? I think one of the biggest thing of the economy right now in India's GDP was spending, consumer demand, consumer spending. And this COVID has crashed the consumer spending in a whole lot of industries. And I think that is where the government, the private sector, and the public sector has to look at it. How do you spur consumer spending more. And I think government has a key role to play in spurring of the demand and the demand spending. And therefore, I believe that the government in the future months will come up with a big program of a public works program, infrastructure program, which will create spending on roads, ports, railways, and many such things. Already you have seen some sort of privatization in railways, which has been announced a few days back. So I believe one of the biggest thing is consumer spending. The second one is investing. I think today again people are not investing because I think everything is a riskier thing. So where do you invest? I think if people are investing in productive assets or people are investing in passive assets or even in financial instruments. Again, every financial instruments, whether it is mutual funds, whether it is in terms of equity, direct equity or debt funds, overall are at relative some amount of risks. I think we will have to see which is much greater risk to ensure that our financial instruments are least affected. And the third most, what people consider is most safe, obviously, of course, in physical assets and passive assets, I would say gold. Productive assets is obviously something that generates income. And cash. I think people are today wanting to be safe, invested, not in any other thing, but just keep it in cash. And the third aspect of the economy is the lending. And who lends it? Banks, public sector banks and private sector banks, non-banking finance companies. And today there is again a huge amount of crisis of confidence in the lenders. They have cash. The banking system is flush with cash, but they are not wanting to lend. So I think today the engines of the economy are jammed, and hopefully, I think this is the biggest thing for everybody, the government, the private sector, the public sector, individuals, to all play a small role in kick-starting back the engine by way of spending, some sort of investing, some sort of lending. I think every relevant actor in the chain has to play a role to ensure that the engines of economy again keep rolling. I believe the government is onto that, but there are it's not an easy and complex thing. There are a lot of cause and effect things that is happening, and hopefully over the next 3 to 6 to 9 months, we get our act together to actually say that 21, 22, at least our GDP can be positive. So I just want to just few concepts here in capital. As I've already mentioned, the risk return balance and capital allocation in business and personal wealth. This is a very important aspect for businessmen, for industrialists, entrepreneurs, कि हम business में कितना लगाए और हमारे business के beyond कहाँ पे है. So business and personal wealth का जो allocation balance है, वो भी बहुत जरूरी है. Debt ले या equity ले, I think people would say in today's level, debt is actually anathema. I would say zero debt भी नहीं, but लेकिन अगर a right mix of debt, obviously you don't over leverage, you might need, because equity you may not get everything. So you will have to do a thing, but I think what we call as a right mix of debt and equity. The question will be, what is the right mix of debt and equity? Obviously, I think we will say fundamentally a debt equity ratio of 1:1 is something which is okay. If you take more than 1:1, 1.5:1, then obviously you have to be absolutely sure of your revenue and profit flows, cash flows to service the debt. So I think a mix of debt and equity is another very, very thing that we will need to look at it from our own capital structuring. दूसरा और एक चीज जो बोलता है asset rich है लेकिन cash poor है. This is another big syndrome that many of the balance sheets may show assets, many of the balance sheet may not show assets. But I think आपके asset और cash reserves अगर उसके ऊपर अगर एक mix हो जाए, and that is something that helps us during such crisis, because you have cash enough to ensure that you are able to see through the next 6-8 months of liabilities or whatever it is. And maybe there's also an opportunity if you have cash, because you will get some assets at distress value, and therefore you will be able to purchase those at that time. So I think the mix of what you have in assets and what you have in cash. Asset rich hoga, lekin cash poor hoga. So you will not be able to encash the opportunity, and you will perhaps be at a risk also of a mismatch in cash flows. So as I said, asset class diversification. In a key sub, you spread your eggs in various baskets, even in terms of personal wealth as well as business wealth. If you are growing in one business, ensure that you are also having some capital which you are keeping outside this business, so that if that business has some problems, you're not, all eggs are not in the same basket. And that applies also to your personal this thing. So sometimes, as I say, return of capital is more important than return on capital. And I think this is the time to say that statement, that return of capital is more important than return of capital. So I have a slide here, which I think since I don't have enough time, I will just maybe use this as something else where maybe I can send this across to people. This is what I classically use to say that return on capital employed कैसे किया जाता है, and इसका ये explain करने के लिए मुझे शायद 15-20 मिनट लग गया, so I will not spread time here on this, but I have this which just to say that we can use various levers at various times to improve our return on capital employed. And this is nothing else but saying that there is a profit and loss part of it, and there is a balance sheet part of it. And the left-hand side of my screen is a P&L part, and the right-hand side of my screen is a balance sheet part, or what I call as a capital efficiency part. So the P&L part on the left side of my screen, the balance sheet is my, and I'm sorry for that lines which are not straight, it's crooked. But what it conveys is essentially what you can influence your return on capital employed by actually working on any one of the levers or all the levers in some way or the other. So I think it's a very useful tool that I found as a thing to ensure that our capital efficiency and allocation is done right, the margins are right, the costs are right, and obviously it may not be right. So maybe this is a tool that you can use it and use your own company's figures to put it into this to say where are you as far as this, where is your organization based on this structure. So I think this is something that fine by mail by I can send it across. Maybe at a later stage, if we have a slightly separate discussion on this, we could do that. So to summarize, whatever I've said, I think these are looks like a little jargon word, but मैं सिर्फ ये बताना चाहता हूँ कि ये मैंने use किया camel, ये word called camel, C for capital. आप जो capital पूंजी लगाते हो, adequate है क्या, allocation बराबर हो रहा है कि नहीं, उसमें से return मिल रहा है कि नहीं और उसका protection है कि नहीं. If you think that there are some things where you are not going to get increasing returns, return is going to diminish, perhaps it is time to, perhaps before the end happens, you pull back that capital. So I think capital adequacy ho, allocation ho, return ho, या protection. Second aspect, आपकी asset. जो मैंने बताया asset की quality, जो working capital asset में quality, velocity और security, ये बहुत ही important चीज है. Fixed asset हो या वर्किंग कैपिटल और उसका de-risking. एंड सबके सेंट्रल जो है मैनेजमेंट. आप, आई एम श्योर ऑल ऑफ यू आर ऑब्वियसली द बेस्ट एंटरप्रेन्योर्स दैट वी आर परहैप्स हैव. I guess something that you can do with your next generation to say we reset the vision, we look at the execution and the transformation journey. So management quality is the most important in all these things. Fourth one is the earnings, which is your quantity of earnings, quality of earnings, and the cost structure. उसमें जो मैं बताया था market share, capacity utilization और इसका break even. So earnings quality में और आपके cost structure में आप ध्यान देना चाहिए कि इस कोविड सिचुएशन में और इस ब्लैक स्वान इवेंट में आप उसको रीस्ट्रक्चर ऐसे करते हो कि आपके नए कोई दूसरे इवेंट के बजाय आने के पहले आप यू आर एक्सट्रीमली फिट. एंड लास्ट बट नॉट द लीस्ट, आई थिंक इज an aspect of liquidity, which is what I call as a velocity times turnover, asset liability match, or the inflow outflow balancing match. So this is what I would summarize it. And I would just try to put this, I'm just looking at saying that who am I? I think every one of you is a businessman. Every one of you is an entrepreneur. I'm just looking at what roles are we playing. So I just like to end this my presentation by saying, from a very philosophical, from a practical business point of view, मैं कौन हूँ? I am all these. I am not just one. I am all this. So who am I? The components are, obviously you are a customer delighter and a revenue earner. We have to have revenue to obviously, because revenue is the fountainhead of everything. So I think customer and revenue earner आप हो कि नहीं हो और आप उसके अंदर क्या कर सकते हो. दूसरा, वर्किंग कैपिटल एक्सेलरेटर. आपके वर्किंग कैपिटल कंपनी में आप एक्सेलरेट करते हो कि नहीं और कैश फ्लो जनरेट करते हो कि नहीं. सो दैट्स अ सेकंड डायमेंशन ऑफ हु एम आई. आई एम अ वर्किंग कैपिटल एक्सेलरेटर एंड अ कैश फ्लो जनरेटर. थर्ड डायमेंशन, obviously in such times, and in these times, those whose governance and compliance is the best, I think, survive. Otherwise, those compliance is short term, is mismatched, governance principles are not okay, will not sustain the long term. I think sustainability ka key is governance and compliance. So are we focusing on that as well? And number 4, I think current business models may have a damage, some permanent damage. So how do you take care of that permanent damage to create new business models? So therefore, strategic thinking and innovation is definitely things which I think many of you are already doing. I know some examples that where people are thinking about the new businesses, new business models, and strategic thinking and innovation becomes a cornerstone of their future growth. Number 5, I think what I mentioned it about de-risking your organization. I've given the risks and the risk mitigation. So are you a risk taker? Are you risk mitigator? If you are risk taker, definitely we should take risks. But I think if you have enough risk mitigation measures, I think that's what the de-risking aspect. And number 6, I think most important in today's times is cost optimization and cost transformation, and therefore waste elimination and cost optimization. So I would just say as a dimension is who am I? This 6 is what we keep looking at it, so that I think there will be definitely areas from which each of these 6 areas we can make a list in the short term, in the mid term, and in the long term. So with these things, I thought I will just, so the first 3 are operational, the top 3 are operational, and the bottom 3, I would say strategic. So with these things, I just wanted to end my presentation here. I hope I was able to come across clearly with some of the concepts. I know it was slightly still a rushed one, but I would be glad if you have any questions on this, and I can be of any help in terms of explaining this. So thank you. Fine by Mehul Bhai. Now I think you can open up the things for some questions based on this.
Yes, thank you so much, RK. It was wonderful listening to you, and it gives us a lot of insight and a lot of thoughts on how we should proceed with our business. We do have questions. Could I request you to stop the screen sharing? Yeah, thank you very much. So we have questions that have come in from attendees here, and I'll take them one by one. The first question that I have is from Vivek Tibrewala. He wants to know whether restructuring of your borrowings, will it lead to any effect on your ratings? Because currently you may be enjoying a very good rating, but if you ask for a restructure on your current borrowings, will it impact the ratings? That's what he wants to know.
A very good question. It was coming from Mr. Tibrewala. I think this today's a question which everybody is thinking. But I think this, as I mentioned, this COVID has created an impact on everybody. I think at a country level, the country was worried whether the ratings would be downgraded because the Fitch and the S&P and Moody's were talking of downgrading. But I think if you're downgrading, it is relative because everybody's rating is also getting downgraded. So I would say a very quick answer to this is that I think we should approach the banks and say proactively. If we are proactive, I don't think the ratings would be affected by saying that I have a plan of reviving the demand and the revenues and the cash flows. And therefore, because of this whole intense impact that it has cost me, I needed 12 months, I needed 15 months, I need 18 months. I am coming proactively the plan. I think rating agencies will take it positively rather than negative.
Great. I hope, Vivek, that answers your question. I have another one from Mr. Anup Syal. He wants to know, do we have credit insurance in India? Which companies are offering this, and what's the points the insurance company look into whilst providing credit insurance to companies like ours, where we ask for a credit insurance?
Again, a very, very relevant question, because I think the concept of insuring of fixed assets was known. The concept of insuring the receivables is something that is relatively new. But yes, in India, companies, there are insurance companies in the public sector and even in the private sector, the Oriental Insurance, New India, and even I think companies like Bajaj Allianz and others are offering credit insurance for receivables. They have a whole set of what we call as a terms and conditions. And I think if today we were insured before the COVID, I think we would have been in better position. Now that with the COVID, everybody wants to go there, there will be a great rush for it. But having said that, I think companies are looking at it very actively. Maybe as a separate thing, I can send a note on what private and public insurers are there and what are the terms and conditions. I can send that as a part of an email So that can help perhaps the customers to then discuss with these companies and take it forward. But yes, in India, that concept is very much prevalent now.
Great. Thank you for that one. I have another one from Mr. Uday Dote. He wants to know, even after restarting, if the demand is not firming up as required, how long to hold on to fixed costs like salaries, rent, power, etc., especially if you are a commercial printer? Because this is what seems to be bothering most commercial printers, because they are the ones who are hit the most with low demand at the moment. So this is what he wants to know, how long to hold on to.
So this is a tricky one, Mehul Bhai, and I am sure Uday, with his background of chart, Uday is himself is a teacher and a great practitioner of his. I'm sure he would have answers on his specifics. But I can just try to attempt a general one. I would look at the concept of what is a break-even. For example, if you are having a certain level of revenues before the COVID, and if nobody will be able to better predict actually what will be the revival in demand back. Now, I would say that if today, at a certain level of business with a certain level of fixed cost, which is salaries, rentals, and all those things, you do a stress test that at 70% of your current business, pre-COVID business, can you make the same returns as what you were doing earlier? As an example, at 60%, 70%. So if you are earlier breaking even at 50% of the business, and if the business is 25% today, you are obviously below break even. So the question is, if you are earlier doing at 50% of the break even, what can make the break even low is obviously lesser amount of fixed cost. I think it is inevitable that the fixed cost major chunk will get affected is salaries. So I would say, is it going to be a pay cut or is it going to be a job cut? I think it will depend upon what sort of roles are going to be relevant and in a post-COVID era, because I think everybody is also looking at this COVID era as also a change to change their business model. And there are a lot of jobs which are perhaps in the current businesses getting redundant because you're able to get the productivity, digitization and other means. So maybe it's like saying that when you actually come back to some sort of normalcy, you may not need the same number of headcounts. But from a socialistic point of view, because obviously it's not an easy thing to take a view of just doing a headcount cut, you identify what is required for whenever the business back to normal or for the whatever businesses to come in. And then you identify the extra, whether you have some growth and you can reskill and retrain them, or you will have to exit some of those people. So it's a tough decision. But I think the question is, I would say, if commercial printers take a call by October, to say that if the demand revival is not going to be more than 60-70% of your pre-COVID, then I guess by that time you should have a blueprint as to what you will do in terms of doing all those right sizing.
So just to stretch Uday's question a little bit based on your answer, commercial printing companies are already feeling the pressure. They are already under tremendous pressure because practically they've had no turnover, no business for the last 3 months. The costs, like you said, have remained the same. And now the pressure of meeting the liabilities, whether it be salaries or making payments, etc., has brought in a huge amount of pressure, not just on the cash flow, but on the reserves that this company has. So would it be prudent to start taking action just now to meet the current level of business and then keep ramping up as you move forward? Would that make sense, or would it be that you are being hasty in this?
No, I think Mehul Bhai, you are very right. I think because we have never experienced this sort of dip in our revenues ever, I think, in our lives. Wherever there has been always generally saying business tight hota hai, business is not good, but we still find revenues are there, cash flows are managing. But now this is the first time when the business is hit to the extent of 50-60%. So definitely I would say that by now we should have already lined up some sort of cost reduction, cost transformation measures. And in that, it is unfortunate, but it's inevitable that some amount of the headcount will go. So I do not want to say each businessman takes a call based on what is relevant and right for his business. And therefore, I think we should have this plan of scaling it back, cutting it back, whether it is a pay cut, whether it is a job cut, whether it is closure of some part, I think is best known to that entrepreneur. And I think that is a risk that you will take. But if when business comes back, you may be able to revive something. Maybe you will not be able to, because if you're shut downing some plants and boxing it up, maybe you may not be able to restart. But I think it's something that anyway, we are in July. So I think we should have that plan ready and put it into action.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to know. Another attendee wants to know, though I don't have his name. The question is, whatever government help is coming is in the forms of loans, that is emergency credit line or subordinate debt, which eventually would add up to your existing debts. Would it really help when the demand is low and not picking up?
So again, a very good question. If revenue is not there, why should you borrow more? So I would like to say that, as I mentioned, two things. If your long-term debts are there, we need to restructure it. So that at least gives us some amount of time for us to saying that the long-term liabilities doesn't hit your repayment in the next 18 months or 12 months. As for a short-term, because I believe that there is also an issue of where you need some time to align your working capital, because you have been struck in the month of March with this thing, and you have, maybe in some cases people have raw material stocks of paper, slightly higher paper, maybe so because you didn't know, and you are to execute some good jobs in the month of April and May. So when you are stuck with this, you are stuck with that costly paper or higher amount of paper or whatever else. So you need some time to restructure, what I call as right size and bring the working capital to normalcy. For that time, you say that I am taking 25% of my working capital extra for a period of 9 months. I should have a clear plan that I will reduce that working capital loan in 9 to 12 months. So if we have a clear distinction of that I'm using it to, because where will I get the money to pay back the loan? From my stocks or debtors as it actually normalcy returns to some level. So I will be very clear that I am not taking this loan for any other long-term thing. I am taking this only for balancing my working capital for the next 6 months. So if we use short-term funds for long-term use, it's an absolute recipe for a disaster. But we use a short-term loan for working capital for short-term working capital normalization with a clear thing that after 9 months I'll repay. I think that we can take.
So what basically we as business people need to do is, if we are doing a short-term borrowing, we will have to have very, very solid fiscal discipline to ensure that that borrowing is utilized for the purpose for which it has been taken and no other purpose, so that in the long run, your debt level does not change.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Thank
yes.
you. Another question I have, which was related to credit risk, the difference being that this gentleman, Mr. Mayank Gupta, wants to know if the credit risk is available for overseas clients also, and how can we take that?
So there is a thing called an export credit guarantee ECGC cover, which is there for export risk as well. And that has been prevalent for quite some time. So for exports, again, there are the ECGCs and some other institutions does it. Again, as a part of the note, I can send that across to BMPA and they can circulate.
Great. If you can send this to us, we will circulate to all of the people who have attended. In fact, even if you would be kind enough to share your presentation with us, we would like to share it with all the attendees today. So if it's okay, please do share that.
Sure.
I have now a question from our president, Mr. Nitin Shah. He is online and he wants to ask directly.
Hi, how are you?
Good afternoon. Go ahead with your question.
Yeah, good afternoon, RKG. How are you? All well?
Well, first class. All well, sir.
Yeah, very simple question I have. In your presentation, you said that we should try and look at our assets, what we have. Certain assets we are not able to utilize as on date, so we should think it and get rid of and create some kind of fund. But in today's time, really, is it possible to liquidate our asset and utilize that fund into our business? Because everywhere people are facing a problem, and all the markets where you can think about the selling of the machines or assets like land, building, whatever it is it going to help? If yes, in which way? And my second question is, there are a lot of new startup has come simply in January, February. And immediately this COVID situation has come. So can you guide to those startups? How should they take it forward? Because there are a lot of established players in this market who are unable to, sustain. So what should be the role of those new startups? Thank you.
Thank you, Nitin bhai. I think very relevant questions. So first one, what you said is, I think easier said than done in terms of, but I would first say that let us utilize the time to really be very clear that which assets are we going to utilize fully. Because what happens is in general situations, we just go about doing some assets at 60, 70% utilization, some at 20, 30%, and some, just we run it. I think I would first say that within our own company and within our own heads, we need to first be very clear that which assets are we going to utilize when normalcy returns or even at 80% normalcy returns. So one is to make an internal list. Issue is whether that is saleable right now. Answer to that is very right, as you said. Today the market is very illiquid. I think there is a whole lot of distress. There will be, I would believe that not just assets, there will be companies which will be going down under. I think there will be it's unfortunate, but it's inevitable that there are some companies who are over leveraged will go down under. The insolvency bankruptcy code will come into play. So I would say that today I will tell you this way, that today the banks are flush with liquidity, but they are not lending because they are also fearful. So I would say that this situation will require an unlocking of the jam. So at least you identify which assets you are not able to utilize, will not. Maybe today you will not get a good price for it because people will also look at very bargain hunting. So the question is, can you hold on for next 6 months and sell it after 6 months? Maybe a better time. For example, in property rates in Mumbai, I'm coming across not just a business, I'm talking of real estate assets in Mumbai. He is already 15 to 20% lower now. And there's a huge inventory. And that huge inventory will to play out. So I think it's not a good time to sell, but identify which you have to sell and take the first opportunity to sell it, maybe after 6 months, 9 months, 12 months. I would say that's the answer to that. As far as your second question is concerned, I think startups, it is again unfortunate from a time point of view where startups require initial amount of time to get nurtured and go up. You are faced with a crisis. So, but startups have also got the, I would say, flexibility to wind down something which they don't need. Maybe established companies will take a little more time to do so, but startups, since they are just into the field, so I would say don't exit business. I think hold on. The question is how long can you hold on? If you are a company which is depending upon VC money for a startup, then obviously the VC will have to be convinced that your business model is relevant even in a post-COVID era, because there will be behavioral changes. And I think if you can convince the VCs that your behavioral changes will be a good positive to your business, but you still need capital to see through the 6 to 8 months, perhaps the VC or equity funding may still continue. But I think there again, a lot of startup companies are winding down something which they think, because rather than burning the money for a longer time, you exit something, you be still nimble enough, but you have a value proposition which makes it relevant in a post-COVID era, then I think your VC partners may perhaps be having confidence to fund you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, RK. I have a question, though not very relevant to the chat we had, the presentation that you had today, but being an industry insider, I think I can take the opportunity to ask you this. This has come from a gentleman over email and another person on the chat. Both are wanting to know that people are now getting used to online and digitalization of things. How is this going to impact print, and will print, particularly commercial print, bloom again? This is their question. So maybe as an industry insider, you can share your take with us on that.
Thanks, Mohel bhai, but I am sure there are more industry veterans sitting here, yourself, Fahim bhai, Nitin bhai, who knows much more about this. I think I'm sitting from a front of a manufacturer or consumable. But anyway, my own limited take is, yes, there are behavioral changes that is happening. And I think the behavioral changes, the whole big question is whether print will be relevant. I think this is relevant even for newspapers, this is relevant for commercial printing, this is relevant for packaging printing. I think the opinion is divided, but I think one thing everybody is sure, that packaging printing is definitely going to see a boom further, because of the fact that many of the products or hygiene products or other even FMCG products, I think the packaging will be more and more important. So packaging as a segment definitely is going to go much better. But again, from a company to company, you will have to ensure that you are right size, your balance sheet is done well. All those things that I just said, we'll have to take a look at. The aspect of commercial print, yes, there is a damage. And I think we still have to assess whether the damage or permanent damage is more than 10, 15, 20%. So if there is a more than 20% damage, what will happen? The amount of jobs will come down, amount of players in the commercial print will come down. So the key question for us is it whether it will be down or not? The key question is whether we will survive post the recovery. So if the recovery is only 80% of normal, will we be a player in that? So I think there are two answers to it. Question one is whether the damage will be 20-30% as a permanent damage. I think only time will tell. We have to look at all those indicators very carefully month on month, number one. And say maybe by Diwali or post Diwali, we know that we've had a structural damage of maybe 20-30%. But at that time, is our business model fit enough with change in the business model? Consumer behavior changes, some of the things are going online very clearly. So, but still for the online players, advertising in newspapers is still required. They will still advertise. So I may say that maybe 70% business may come back, but in that 70%, is your business fit enough to survive? So I think that's where I think we need to also focus our energies and attention on.
I agree with you completely, because what's happening is the consumption pattern is going to change, and that consumption pattern will require us commercial printers to evolve along with that to remain relevant. If we don't evolve, then we are going to become irrelevant in the long term. So I guess it's going to take a little time, but it's going to happen, and those who evolve will be relevant in the coming days.
Right.
Thank you very much, RK. I think with that, we've finished with all the questions. I'd now like to invite Mr. Fahim Akbotwala to propose a vote of thanks and also talk about what we are planning as the next webinar for BMPA. Over to you, Fahim.
Thank you, Mehul Bhai. And it's always a pleasure to listen to RK, because he tries and, cuts the jargon and explains us in a manner in which a non-finance person can understand what's going on. So brilliant session, RK. The first time when I heard this, I said this must go to the entire BMPA audience. Thank you for sharing your lovely thoughts. And if you could please follow up with all those various things that we discussed, we can then send it to our members and they get more information. We really value association with RK and Technova, and thank you very much once again. I'd also like to thank all the participants for being there on time and helping us begin bang on time and ending on time also. I believe we're going to end on time. Just before we end, I'd like to make a very important announcement. On Saturday, July 18th at 12 noon, Saturday, July 18th, 12 noon, we have a session on how to manage depression. The reason why the BMPA has come up with this particular session is that we do realize that there's doom and gloom all around us, and it's going to be long term. We can't sugarcoat our words and say all will be fine on 15th of August. There will be a vaccine and we'll all be back to 100% production. That might not happen. We all wish it happens, but it might not happen. So this depression and this trend is there to stay, not only in 2020, but maybe in 2021. But does that mean this is the end of the world? How do we live with this? We have a very accomplished speaker by the name of Arvind Kinvesra, and he's listed as one of the 10 most promising life coaches in 2019 by the Silicon India magazine. He runs a YouTube channel. He's a certified NLP practitioner, and he's coached and trained more than 5,000 participants in the last 5 years. The interesting thing is that he has a total experience of 27 years, which includes 22 years in manufacturing and IT industry. So he's not a guru who's going to quote from some religious texts. He's going to be telling us about how to manage depression practically. So once again, Saturday, July 18th, 12 noon, we'll be sending out all the information very, very soon. I request you all to please register for it. And I'd like to thank RK, Mehul Bhai for doing a wonderful job, Nitin Bhai for allowing us to do this webinar, and the participants for taking their time out. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mehul Bhai. Thank you, Fahim Bhai. Thank you, BMPA. I think it gives me a great opportunity to interact with all of you. I think from my old sense, I think I believe it is for my individual social responsibility to share whatever little I have in terms of with all the other, customers and printers. So thank you very much. And I think if there are any further follow-up questions beyond whatever was there, I would be glad to take it by way of an email or something like that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, RK, and thank you, Prashant. We are now leaving the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.